All
If we
right.
can mute the library, it'll be quieter and we'll be able to hear him easier.
So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about uh, the fundamentals of using increased colonies and growing your operation, stabilizing your operation, using as a way of using the increased colonies as a way of kind of keeping your bees going and doing a good job.
Maybe we can mute everybody except the speaker.
I'm going to get out of this. I don't know what it is doing. All right. We try this again. All right. So the main things we're going to talk about, we want to talk about understanding honeybee reproduction. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but just enough that you get a sense of the numbers that are involved, the number side of beekeeping. We're going to talk a little bit about making and using increased colonies to make nukes or splits or divides, whatever you want to call them. I don't care. And then managing colonies for sustainability, which includes location, genetics, and nutrition. So almost 10 years ago, I wrote an article for the American Bee Journal, The Numbers Game, Understanding Honeybee Reproduction, and most of those comments are in the second edition of my book, Increase Essentials. And you know, this isn't a big secret. This is something that should be part of every beekeeping 101 training. And maybe not all of this, but you know, some of the basics here. One of the basic advantages of working with insects versus working with birds or chickens or pigs or whatever you want to raise, any mammal or bird system, is that beekeepers have a tremendous reproductive potential with their beehive. And where you might have a chicken laying a dozen eggs and having a brood of 12 chicks, if everything goes well. With honeybees, you have a much larger brood rearing potential. And we often get really frustrated when we look at the annual survey, which I think just ended. The input just ended, as the results haven't come out yet, that show huge losses, 30, 40, 50% losses of our beehives nationally. And this is every winter or whatever your equivalent is, because many people have a nectar dearth when they're in an area probably like what some of you deal with in California. And whereas I'm getting I'm getting very hopeful that this weekend it's going to be in the 70s or 80s, and we're going to get a lot of nectar come in. And then we're going to be chasing swarms. Neither of those have really happened in a good way. I say good in terms of growing bees. But all this gets back to the fact that one of the unique aspects of bee husbandry is this insect's amazing ability to make a lot of new bees in a really short time period. So this answers the question of how can a beekeeper who's lost 50% of their colonies take a deep breath and calmly state that they'll rebuild their losses, often in one spring buildup season. Or a beekeeper that has 40 colonies boasts that they can fill 200 colonies with bees in 2 seasons with the bees that are in their 40 colonies. And this is a real interesting difference working with insects. In the book that Dewey Karen and I have written, which is in a new edition, but hasn't been finished at the printer yet, thanks to COVID and paper prices and labor issues and of a significant hack by somebody that they don't know, 17 major printing facilities were shut down by cyber attack. Anyway, the primary goal, according to what we write in the book, is the primary goal of every beekeeper is to maximize the number of bees in a colony at the same time that the colony has the potential to produce the maximum amount of honey. So in other words, you want to optimize your number of bees when you get your peak nectar flow, assuming that it's nectar you want to make honey. A variation on that would be you want the largest number of pollen collectors to go into the orchard and whatever your target crop may be for maximum pollination benefit. Or if you're in the business of raising queens or packages or nukes, that you have the most number of bees when you're ready to do this. And some of this the bees do automatically. You just sit back and monitor. And that's probably one of the best things you can do as a beekeeper is learn to monitor your bees. Now, without this numerical advantage, the power of mathematics, I think the bee industry, excuse me, pollination business would be in a lot more desperate state. But the evolution of honeybees have refined high reproductive rates by combining their egg-laying rate with repeated swarming. Those two behaviors, the high egg-laying rate, they're not unrelated. And they, for example, a colony with a low egg-laying rate is probably not likely to swarm. And, I've had people from California tell me they had colonies that have never swarmed. They've watched them carefully. And the bees just don't have a big brood nest. So they just they're on a set maintenance kind of existence and they're not growing up. That's pretty unusual, I think, but maybe something that's selected for that particular region of the state. So the combination of swarming and egg laying rate really keep beekeepers on their toes. Earlier, you were talking about feeding bees, and colonies can go from starving to go from taking down a container of sugar water to starving to death in a matter of a few days. So many beekeepers will keep feeding until the nectar flow is well established. You can always add honey, frames of honey, or what I call a brood frame. That's honey and brood, and maybe some pollen. When the bees need food, need bees to boost them and keep them going. You can provide young larvae so that the bees can create a new queen, especially if the colony has lost a queen, a supersedure queen or a swarm queen, was eaten by a dragonfly or destroyed during a thunderstorm, whatever happened to put her out of her misery. Now, one of the things, I had a friend here in Michigan contact me today, and she said, "What is that number? The number of swarms that survived to be a year old?" And I get that from Tom Seeley's book, Honeybee Ecology. And he says that one colony, excuse me, one colony out of 6 or 16% of all swarms will survive and live to their first birthday. 16%, 1 out of 6. That means 5 out of 6 swarms don't make it. And so this is something that's puts a lot of pressure on beekeepers. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure on the bees to survive. And so we look at the losses that we report on our statistical summaries, and we realize that, since CCD appeared, that even those losses, excuse me for the cough. I haven't talked to anybody all day. I've got some water here. Anyway, the losses, the 30, 40, 50, 60% are still not as bad as 1 out of 6. So beekeepers may lose a lot of bees, but Mother Nature somehow naturally loses more, which is sort of a humbling thought that we're trying to compete with Mother Nature, and sometimes we do a better job. So We know that back when I was a student at Michigan State in 1960s, my professor said that the average winter mortality was about 10% most years. That's a 90% success rate. So beekeepers must have been doing something very, very well before tracheal and varroa mites. I don't know anybody that has that rate anymore. And with the mites, I think that 30 to 50% range is probably in the somewhere in where many people are. And some people have a total loss because the mites get out of control. They're not managed at all, or treatment was done incorrectly. But one of the first things we want to talk about is the egg-laying rate. And an egg-laying rate is nothing, it's the number of eggs a queen produces in a day. You can estimate the number of eggs based on the amount of sealed brood in a hive. And you can use a plexiglass sheet, or you can go in with a pocket ruler, and you can calculate the width and depth of each side of both sides of a frame that has brood on it, and add them up. So you got 5 frames with brood on it. That's 10 measurements. And you're going to add those up. And that's going to give you the number of square inches of sealed brood that you've got. And because with honeybees, it's about 25 developing worker bees per square inch. If you multiply that number by 25, that'll give you an estimate of the number of bees in the sealed stage. Now, that's not quite yet the egg-laying rate. Back when I was running the Daydamp program in Florida in the 70s, the Starline and Midnight program, we made crosses of all the different potential hybrids, two-way hybrids of the queens and drones from each inbred line. And then we found that the egg-laying rates in the majority of the colonies range between 1,200 and 1,800 eggs per day. There were some outliers in both directions. The Starline hybrid was selected because it optimized brood rearing and honey production with an egg-laying rate of about 1,500 eggs per day. Lower than that, the bees didn't produce enough bees to keep the colony growing. Higher than that, they produced too many bees. And quite often the bees would end up swarming, or they just eat all the honey they produced. At 1,500 eggs per day, you have to reduce the total number here somewhere between 5 and 10% for what we call normal diploid drone production. You've rarely seen a frame of sealed brood that doesn't have some mixed spots. And those are probably where diploid drones have been produced, which all that means is that the drone has the same allele from both the drone and the queen. And the bees deal with that because it's an anomaly to them by eating the larvae. If you have a hygienic stock, Minnesota hygienic or one of the other hygienics that have been selected, you have to reduce the bee yield by a percentage that reflects the mite load. Let's give an example. If you have 1,500 eggs in a day, 10% of them are diploid drones, you subtract 150. And let's say it's a hygienic stock, so you take another 150 off. We're just estimating here. We may not know exactly what the numbers are. So the number of bees that actually emerge, not the egg-laying rate, but the number of bees that emerge will be about 1,200 bees per day. Let's have some fun with that. If the egg-laying rate is 1,500 eggs per day and the emergence rate is 1,200, and if there's about 3,500 bees in 1 pound of bees, those of you who bought packages, you want to know how many bees were in the box. If you bought a 2-pound package, you had about 7,000 worker bees there and a queen, hopefully, in a cage. In 3 days, a good queen is going to produce about 3,600 new bees, or 1 pound. well, within 100 bees of it. In 30 days, in a month, a good queen is going to produce 36,000 bees or 10 pounds of bees. And in 60 days, a good queen is going to produce 7,200 bees, 72,000 bees, or 20 pounds of bees. So now you see where this tremendous potential for reproduction comes to benefit both the beehive and the beekeeper. Of course, it isn't any good if these bees are produced, emerge from the cell, and immediately die. And so we have a lot of literature in the bee journals and the scientific publications and online talking about fall bees or fat bees or winter bees. And my daughter lives in Alaska, and they're going to have a dearth period, a period without any brood rearing, sometime in August to sometime in April. Here in Michigan and New York State, and maybe some of you are, it may be from September until March. You go to South Florida, you probably will have brood rearing until the end of October, and it'll start up again in late January and February. Same is probably true in southern parts of California. So management things like feeding and wind protection, these are all going to benefit the colony and give you, some return on your investment of time and energy and sugar syrup. These winter bees, these fat bees, they keep the brood nest warm during the winter, or non-summertime if you're, in a warmer climate, and or a dearth. They're going to have to maintain the temperature of the brood nest, what I call homeostasis, proper conditions in the hive. And they're going to be responsible for raising the first brood of the new year or the new reproductive cycle. In many parts of the tropics, the first brood is produced when the rains come. It's been dry, the rains come, stimulate flowers to bloom, and then the bees gather the pollen and nectar, and brood rearing starts up again. Winter bees need to be well fed during their development. Kind of the expression is the bees that feed the bees that go into winter have to be well fed. So it's not a simple approach, but it is an important one that you understand that the bees that feed the winter bees are well fed during their development. Excuse me. Summer bees, the bees that your colonies are probably producing now. They're the bees that are clean cells, feed brood, build comb, guard the hive, process nectar into honey and pollen into bee bread. They're going to eventually forage for pollen, nectar, water, and propolis. Many beekeepers think the bees live 6 weeks as adults, 3 as nurse bees and house bees, and 3 weeks as field bees. But what happens if the summer bees only live 4 weeks or less? So how do you measure longevity? It's not easy. You can set up a scientific study, and I'm not suggesting you do this, by the way. And you emerge bees in an incubator and you mark them uniquely, numbered tags or color combinations. Von Frisch did some of this. The people that did work with drone mating, they marked each drone with a different color pattern. And then go back into an incubator and look at the number of marked bees that are in the hive or in the colony. And you introduce these bees into a colony. I should have said that. You count the bees that you've got every 7 to 10 days, and you can estimate longevity. And if the bees live 20 days, good. If they live 30 days, fantastic. If they're all gone on 40 days, it's probably not unusual. But if all the bees are gone on 10 days, longevity is an issue, and you need to be concerned about that. So Small cage studies can be used to estimate longevity, and small cages with bees in them and the number of bees that die every day can be counted. And these studies have been used. My first exposure was back at Ohio State University when Walter Rothermuller and researchers like Tom Render were working on hoarding behavior. And they would compare bees in small cages with 50 or 100 bees, and they look at different genetic stocks, food supplements, micronutrients, and other things. Clearly not a natural environment. Just going back to that for a second, in overall, I think you probably just want to watch, see how colonies survive in terms of their numbers. And if you seem to have a higher die-off, you may want to try to figure out what's going on with that colony. If there's a problem with the bee's longevity or some other problem, pesticide exposure, poor queen performance, or a long list of things we could probably come up if we take the time. Now, the second factor that I mentioned was reproduction through swarming. In nature, swarms come out of most colonies in their second year and additional years if they live long enough. With spring buildup, there can be a combination of factors that simulate swarming in healthy bee colonies. Somewhere between 40 and 60% of the bees leave with the swarm. If you've seen it, you know it's a really dramatic rush to the entrance. Fascinating to observe. Drones and just about any bee that's in the way gets pushed out with the swarm. And it's usually the older queen, the mother queen that goes with the swarm, but sometimes it's a virgin queen, a daughter queen. Clearly in the case of most colonies that are producing a second swarm, a secondary or even tertiary or third, fourth swarm, the other colonies, the mother queen is probably already left. So these are virgin queens that are leaving. And this is why you see colonies that are in the swarming process produce multiple queen cells. And they're in the process of, your goal here with swarming, if you want to make this your goal. I'm not saying you should, but I think more beekeepers use it. This is turns out to be what they end up doing. They produce daughter colonies that are living in nearby hives, nesting sites that they found and established. And you've got the parent hive that's still surviving, hopefully. And we expect about 75% of those queens to have mated. About 25% of them probably will fail because of everything from weather to dragonflies to birds. You have birds in California, I understand. So that would be a factor that could interfere with your success rate. Now, Steve Rapatsky in our book, Swarm Essentials, he points out that colonies are tremendous risk takers, and they put enormous resources into swarming, especially that prime swarm. A lot of bees, a lot of honey that leave. If the bees could figure out how to take the comb with them, move the furniture, they probably would, but they haven't done it. But they take the precursors of that furniture, the honeycomb, in honey. And so that's why many colonies a swarm will move into a new cavity, an abandoned cavity, or an empty cavity, and start comb building almost immediately, sometimes overnight. Also, it's one reason why we see that colonies that have a choice in their nest selection will often take an old colony and inhabit that. And I've not an intentionally scientifically planned thing, but we've noticed that here in my backyard for the last 4 or 5 years, that we always get 2 to 4 swarms that move in from the neighbors. And I figure that's the balance for all the swarms we've produced, our colonies have produced over the years, so that, we're just getting payback from our bad management. So our one form of bad management may be leading to another form of bad management. But, it is not unusual to see bees occupy that space. Other points from Rapasky's book. Many hives swarm more than once in a season. Replacement queens and virgin queens must mate. And as I said earlier, they often suffer a 25% loss because they have to deal with birds, dragonflies, other predators, sudden weather changes, and orientation issues if you have more than one hive in a location and the bees drift from their hive is at colony A and they go to colony B instead, and they're killed in the process. So our summary here is that if you understand honeybee reproduction, it's going to help you understand why you have this potential, tremendous potential. And as we get into the next topic, you can make and use nucleus colonies, increased colonies, whatever you want to call them. I call them increased colonies. To me, that's what we're doing. But Langstroth used the word nucleus. He was a great proponent of making increased nucleus colonies. And so we're going to go to the next topic.
No, it was.
And talk about so we're going to talk about a method that's been around for over 100 years. And I've been writing and talking about it for a number of years now. And it's what I call the Doolittle split. And it's a way of making an increased colony without finding a queen. For every area, this is for Maryland, but every area you probably have a potential of a chart that show the number of swarms. This is based on swarm calls at an extension office. If you're a bee club, you might have your own swarm number and you can record that. You see, we got 1920 swarms at a peak in May in Maryland. But they started out sometime in April and they lasted until sometime in June. And then there could be a fall swarming season, which can be August, September, even October. I don't know about you. What do you want to do with a swarm that comes out in October? There's not a lot left for them to do in terms of beekeeping. Now, I've written about having 2.5 hives for a number of years, and I've given many lectures on it. I may have given some there in California. And so you have 2 colonies and you use increase frames, whatever method you want to use, and swarm cells or supersedure cells. Here's some 3 very nice Russian stock queen cells. These were produced in a hive in Connecticut, and I lived in Connecticut. And they're good shape, and with a little careful cutting, you could get 4. You see the one in the back? You can get 4 queen cells out of this colony, and that can be used to provide the queens or potentially provide queens for 4 increased colonies. Now, the Doolittle method is based on letting bees build up on their own, feeding them as necessary, and getting them to build up nice and strong. And then go in and pick out 3, 4, or 5 frames of brood that have food, I mean honey and or nectar, and pollen or bee bread, and at least 3 frames of brood. And this could be sealed and open. And then once you got everything set up, you can take each frame and gently tap it at the entrance and let the bees just crawl back in. And this is why you don't have to find the queen, because if the queen is in there, she's going to walk right in. You didn't spend the next hour looking for the queen. If she's there on those frames, she may not be. She may be already in the hive because you didn't move that frame. And, and then you're going to raise that brood above the hive with the queen excluder. Here's a really fancy one. Beekeeper made for me. I'm not that good. I would use a piece of queen excluder and a board to do this. But you can see he's made this so that a 5-frame brood box would fit right in there. And the key is that we're going to put the bee-free brood above that queen excluder. The bees are crawling back in. And the bees are going to sort themselves out because they're attracted to that brood. So here's a frame that's probably got some eggs on it. I'm not sure what's on there, but I must have had a good reason to figure it. Here you can see some nectar and eggs. The eggs are in the lower part of the frame. And sealed brood, emerging brood. I like to get as much emerging brood as I can. And then if you happen to have a frame that has some queen cells on them, swarm cells or supersedure cells, don't shake them. Do not shake those frames. If you can't find the queen, you can brush the bees off to make sure the queen's not there. And then use that as your source of queen. That's one source. So these could be swarm cells or supersedure cells, or in my experience, I use a virgin queen in a cage. This is the JZBZ cage. It's marked. The queen is marked. We can come back in a couple of weeks and tell whether our queen has gone out and mated, because she'll be laying, but she has a big dot of paint on her thorax. And we've done this with thousands of queens and had pretty good success with it. You don't see it mentioned much in the beekeeping literature. Why? Most beekeepers are afraid to mark queens. That's my opinion. And just looking at this queen cage, you notice there's a queen there, but you'll notice also that there's a candy plug with that pink cap. Now we'll leave that queen in there for about 2 days and come back and pull that cap off. Make sure the candy is soft and let the bees emerge this queen. Meanwhile, the bees will crawl up through that queen excluder, cover the brood, cover the queen, feed the queen, and all is well. And if you happen to have a queen rearing operation nearby, or if you raise your own queens, you can use a queen cell. This is a cell that's probably going to emerge in the next 2 or 3 days, and very carefully place it so the flange, if you will, of the queen cell is pushed into the beeswax, and push the comb up against it so that you don't damage the cell. So here's the setup. You've got a 2-frame hive, not a particularly strong hive, but not a weak one either. We've got our queen excluder board, or doolittle board, if you want to call it that. And then if this is a 5-frame nuke, you can put 5 frames in there. And I do this for a reason. A friend of mine who heard a lecture, and people said, well, remove the frames, and nobody said replace the frames. So here's a box of frames of foundation used to replace the frames that are in the hive, which is hopefully going to discourage swarming by the parent hive. And also maybe 1 frame might be used up above as a just for space, depending on what you have down below. I usually move 5 drawn combs, or as you saw here, partially drawn. There's a lid, leave that overnight. The next day you can come in and the queen should be up, or the queen is up there. The bees will have covered all that brood, and then you can take it and move it into a nuke. And that's what that polystyrene box is all about. That is an empty box, transfer this in. And the only reason I do this, I don't have a polystyrene box that's that. Do a little board, if you want to call it that. So it takes, what, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to do this. Just being really careful that you don't damage any of these when you do that. So here you have it. You've got 1 hive, 2 hives, and half a hive that you made without finding the queen. This is in my backyard. It looks worse now than it does right now, than it does in the photos. So, you know, trying to keep things natural. So you don't need to raise a queen. You can use swarm cells. You can use supersedure cells. You can let the bees sort themselves up while going up into the comb, which is the biggest mistake most beekeepers make when they make nukes. Is they put in too many old bees or not enough of the right age bees. And then, and I didn't mention this, 1 or 2 frames of with honey on it. I say frames of honey, full frames of honey might be overkill for these bees. We discussed this in Bee Essentials. We discuss it in Increase Essentials, which is approaching another reprinting. Thank you very much for that. We've had really good success with that. And we've included it in our new edition, 3rd edition, Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping, which has been the victim of COVID. We have, like lumber prices, we have a paper shortage for the kind of paper we want to use in the book, or any paper. And then we have a huge labor shortage in the printers. And trucking costs are up, shipping costs are way up. And the most recent development has been in this operation that we use here in Michigan. They belong to a network of 17 large book publishers, world or countrywide. They were hacked. They had somebody came in, and right now they're in the process of converting our book in, or our files, electronic files, into a hardcover of the book. And most every piece of equipment, the plate formatter that makes plastic plates that the publisher uses in the printer, and the printer itself, which is size of a semi, printing 4 or 5 color copies, colors at a time. And then those have to be bound up. So the binder is affected. So they've done a workaround on the binder. They ran out of end sheets, so they had to get my permission to use an alternate paper on the end sheets. End sheets, the cover that keeps the kind of keeps the cover on the book itself together. You don't learn a lot about publishing when you want to do this. And, oh, did I mention price? I hate to tell you, everything is costing more. On the positive side, this book is greatly expanded. We're up over 100 pages, 488 pages I'm reading. We've added 2 new chapters. There's a full glossary. It's a pretty impressive book when and if it gets released. That's it, folks. Time for your Q&A. Are you all asleep?
No.
Thank you, Dr. Connor. Taking a look at the chat now. I don't see any questions in chat, so if anyone on the call has any questions, just unmute yourself and looks like we've got one from the room.
Hi, this is Elodie.
You gotta click it.
I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having an issue with the audio. You might have to come speak into the laptop. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's good. Yeah, so I understand you're saying that we need to feed the bees that then make it through the winter. So for us,
Yes.
that we would be feeding the bees in September-ish. They're going to feed the bees from winter here in California.
Yeah, I would say that you might start as early as August. I don't know what your nectar flow is. I know some parts of California I have visited several times and I've been out in September in San Francisco, and I'm impressed with your nectar flows you can get out there at that time of the year.
That was actually my question, because that is the driest time of the year. We often have wildfires. I think it's hard to keep the bees going at that particular point.
Yeah, anytime you're going to, you know, the bees are struggling to survive. You really want to think about, do I want to get out there? I probably should get out there and feed my bees some sugar syrup. And 2 to 1, 2 parts sugar, 1 part hot water. And you know, figure out where this fits into your other management issues, mite control, mite treatments, whatever else you've got. And just make sure that the bees that are being produced in the fall are going to be as healthy as possible. I'm not suggesting you medicate, but some people would say, oh, that'd be a good idea. So that's the decision I think you have to make about medication. But feeding is good. A lot of beekeepers, commercial beekeepers, serious hobbyists, you know, people with 100, 200 colonies, they're sideliners in my opinion, but they consider themselves hobbyists.
Yeah.
That's the only way they can keep their spouse happy. So it's just a hobby. Anyway, I think that a lot of us are well to spend the money and keep those bees fed. Yeah, so that's one extreme. The other extreme is the have a few catch hives in the bee yard, right where you want to have the hive. You don't have to put a trap out. Just put them right there in an empty spot in the bee yard. See if anybody occupies the space. And as I said, what has it been, 4 or 5 years? Every year I get 2 or more swarms move in. So, you know, all those years I was visiting my daughter in Alaska. My son calls me from my backyard. He said, Dad, you got a swarm in the pine tree. And I said, do you think you can get it? And he said, no. And he said, and there's a swarm in the maple. And I said, do you think you can get that? He said, no way. It's 100 feet up. So we've contributed a lot of bees to the environment, which, you know, I know a lot of people don't like that idea because you're some of these swarms are going to go into the sides of houses and, you know, may put people at risk. But on the other hand, if they're surviving and doing a good job, why not? You know, and it isn't intentional. It's just what happens. So kind of a glib, snarky answer, but one way to do it. Any other questions? How many of you have actually tried something like the Doodle method? Anybody? I don't know how I'd see the answer. I can see the image in the library, and I don't see any hands coming up.
We do have one person with their hand up, possibly asking a question. Naomi?
Okay. Well, let me just finish on the Doodle method. Before COVID, I was in British Columbia, and I gave the same talk, or an earlier version of it. And a commercial beekeeper came up after the talk, and he said, my family and I run 2,000 colonies of bees, and we've been using the Doodle method for, he told me a number of years, we'll say 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. Doodle was alive in 1888, and 1908 was when he published his second book. So it's been a while. So can you imagine having 2,000 colonies that you split using a method that nobody knows anything about? So he says that was my take on it. Okay, next question.
Just a question about the baits in your bait hive. What do you use? I used to catch a lot of swarms like in the last few years, but this year and last year, 0. So I'm
The
thinking,
only bait I have in there is drawn comb.
oh, that's all?
Yes, that's it.
They don't have any like swarm commander or grass, the lemongrass.
I've tried lemongrass and I don't think it hurts.
So
And
you just use drone cone?
this year I'm going to have my son put some lemongrass in some of his dead out colonies because he lost several, and see if he has any success getting swarms to move in there. But we don't fuss, we just the equipment is clean. We're in a disease, hopefully we're in a disease-free area. And the colonies that die, they usually die in the spring. They die in March or early April. So they just, when the season is late, as it is this year, I'm hopeful for 70-degree weather this weekend. A month ago, we had the maples in bloom. And so the bees had a boost then. But then, we probably had 2 or 3 snowstorms and a fair amount of rain. I'm sorry about the rain, but if you're looking for rain. But anyway, I think, if you have time to put the lemongrass oil on, or actual lemongrass itself, give it a try.
Thank you.
And I'm using 5-frame nukes for this.
What was that last thing?
Using 5-frame nukes for these.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't use, well, I think we might have had the bees go into 1 8-frame colony. It's not scientific. This is not a planned study. This is just their nature and meets laziness. So,
Well, thanks for all your information.
oh, you're welcome.
Thanks.
So this has been good. Enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, I don't know if you can see the website, wickwas.com, but my email is just ljconnor@aol.com. Yeah, I've been around that long. And so feel free to drop me a note to say you were listening to the program tonight and you had a question, and hopefully I'll get back to you the same day. But
Dr. Connor, we have one question from in the library.
good.
Yeah, how you doing? I've got a question about mic control. I use mineral oil, vaporized mineral oil, to try and be a little more, without doing a chemical.
Okay.
Do you have any information on that? Have you ever done it? How often should it be done? Is it recommended, or is there a better way of going about it?
Well, I've got 2 comments. I've never used mineral oil for mite control, but I'll also say that mineral oil should be fairly safe to use around bees. As far as the frequency, doesn't mineral oil coat the bees?
Yeah, it's supposed to act like I guess the mites breathe through their body like any other mite is supposed to suffocate them. I have noticed that there is a fairly good drop on my board after I've treated, so it does seem to have an effect.
Mites or bees?
Mites. It has an effect.
I'm quite serious in asking that because I've seen some treatments that beekeepers have used, and I swear for every mite they've killed 4 bees or something like that. It just seems like they have a heavy load, so be careful.
Okay.
Does anybody else in the audience have any experience using mineral oil? And you're using a fumigation form, right?
Yeah, it vaporized.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm not. That's not on my list of things to do.
It was debunked as a treatment years ago.
Oh, it was. Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
Look on B source.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
I don't know anybody in Michigan or the East Coast that's used mineral oil. So that may be the reason why it doesn't work. Okay, anybody have anything else? Well, this has been fun.
Are you close to Tillers International?
Am I what?
You're in Kalamazoo, right?
Yes.
Are you close to Tillers International, this farm? Are you familiar with
I'm
that
familiar
one?
with them. I don't have any contact with them. Tillers.
Okay.
I met them when I moved here, 15, 16 years ago, moved back here. I grew up here. And they made it abundantly clear they didn't want to have any contact with me.
Oh, okay. So anyway.
I'm seen as an evil competitor.
Okay. Okay, it has nothing to do with your lecture. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thank
I think
you.
they're trying to do some good work,
Mm.
but that's neither here nor there. I've had some good luck working with college students at the local university, Western Michigan University here in Kalamazoo. And that program did not have legs. It survived for about 4 years. But it's interesting that all of the people that worked on it, I think all of them, 5 or 6 really motivated college students have all become leaders in the environmental movement or some other aspect, environmental detection, monitoring, whatever it is. So it was a good experience, and I'm actually mentoring one as a follow-up, a woman who's late 20s, but hopefully get her expanding her queen rearing operation. Ironically, on the farm across the street from the farm there I grew up as a kid. So small world. So there you are.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Connor. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
stop the recording now.